What up, what up, what up, what up, what up? What's going on, everybody? What is going on? And welcome to the Mets Morning Blunt. Welcome back to the Mets Morning Blunt. And that's my fault, not your fault. Not your fault at all. Been a little busy and just, want to make, just don't want to do videos. Want to make something good. So I know we're going to do this daily, but maybe it'll be every other day. Maybe it'll be 3 times a week. There'll be weeks that'll be every day. We're just gonna do them when we do them. But today's morning blunt is gonna be an interesting one. It's probably gonna be all over the place like we usually are blunt thoughts. But it's just a couple of things that are running through my mind, right? A couple of things that are just running through my mind as we watch playoff baseball, as we anticipate what the offseason is going to bring for our New York Mets, and we're talking about which direction we're going to go. What does this team do? What does this team does not do? And so on and so forth, right? And there's a lot of talk. There's talk around, obviously, the obvious, Peter Alonso, right? And that's the easy way to change this core if that's what you're into, or improve run prevention if that's what you're into, right? And so on and so forth. There's talk about maybe trading some guys, and maybe one of those guys could be maybe a Brandon Nimmo or Jeff McNeil, or you pick whoever the hell you want to pick, right? But there was also a story on SNY.com by our good friend Andy Martino, who revisited the whole George Springer situation. And we know that the Mets were flirting with bringing in George Springer. Where was that? In 2021 when he signed his contract? I forget exactly when it was. I think I have it written down here. Yes, George Springer in 2021 signed a 6-year, $150 million contract for an AAV of $25 million a year. And that was around the time where Steve Cohen had just bought the team, right? And they were looking to make a splash. Sandy Alderson, who was still in charge, was looking to make a splash. At the same time, he hired some guys to come in here and run the front office, kind of. I'll run baseball operations. And Jared Porter and Zach Scott, right? As he hired them as a GM and assistant GM. But he had already had some things in motion. He had George Springer in motion. He had JT Realmuto in motion, who he pivoted, we know, to James McCann. Great job, Sandy. He had Francisco Lindor trade in motion, right? So listen, first things first, I played around and I said the Mets chose Nimmo. No, the reality is that at that point, like I said, Sandy wanted to make a splash, but Sandy wanted to make a controlled splash, right? Sandy wanted to make an announcement that we have new ownership and we're going to throw some money around, but also wanted to be responsible and stay under the cap and all that nonsense, right? Under the luxury tax and all that nonsense. Not the cap. There's no salary cap. And then these guys came in and they said, hey, listen, George Springer, good idea. Good ball player. But eventually, soon, he's going to have to move off of center field, and we're going to pay him as a center field and so on and so forth. I don't know how the conversation went. I'm just reading in between the lines of what Andy Martino wrote. They also looked at the time that we had, Sandy was looking at it as center fielder was a big need. The other guys were like, not so much. Sandy was like, we already got a couple of shortstops. The other guys were like, okay. But if you want impact, you go and you make that Francisco Lindor trade that you've been messing around with. And they pivoted towards that. So the Mets really chose Francisco Lindor over George Springer. But at the same time, they did that because they had a Brandon Nimmo. And they ended up moving a Brandon Nimmo to center field to cover that. Now, we know that Brandon Nimmo has now moved off of center field, but we also know that they gave Brandon Nimmo a contract. And that's what we get to, right? So I go back and I look at the numbers and I say, what if the Mets would have signed George Springer? Hey, George Springer just had a good year right now. George Springer just hit 32 home runs, drove in 84 RBIs, had a 309 batting average, a 959 OPS. He had 27 doubles, 18 stolen bases. What else you want to know? A 161 OPS plus, just phenomenal stuff. A great 2025. Obviously we saw the go-ahead home run in Game 7. Who doesn't want that on their team? And at the time, we wanted George Springer. But this is also New York. And I have a question for you guys. And it's been talked about. This is nothing original, right? But it's something that we think about. I think about it all the time. Are we to blame for some players' failures here? For some of these teams' failures here? And I'm just talking about overall in New York sports. Why I say that? Because we're not patient, ladies and gentlemen. If George Springer was here, would we have been happy? Yeah, his first year, 2021, It was okay. It wasn't the 34 home run or the 39 home runs that he once hit in Houston. It was 22 home runs. It was a 907 OPS. A 264 batting average. But would we have been happy with that after giving him a big contract? Follows it up in 22 with 25 home run, a 267 average again, an 814 OPS this time. 23 dips even more. 24 dips even more. And then finally in 25, like I said, does what he does. So we can talk about Brandon Nimmo, right? And whether he's been getting worse, he's been getting better, and how that's been, and so on and so forth. But let's just look at WAR. How about WAR? 21 WAR for George Springer, 2.3. For Brandon Nimmo, 3.5. 22 for George Springer, 4.2. Brandon Nimmo, 5.0. 23 for Springer, 2.0. Brandon Nimmo, 4.0. 24 for Springer, 1.1. 24 for Nimmo, 2.2. So Nimmo had a better WAR every year up until this season where, again, Springer bounces back, has a great year. At age 35, I should say, too. Age 35. At age 35, Nimmo's doing this. And then he has a 4.8 WAR, and Nimmo has a 2.9. But Nimmo's 32. Nimmo's 32. But how we have, look at the way that fans have been talking about Brandon Nimmo and his contract and how he's been stealing money from the New York Mets. Where the reality is Brandon Nimmo's been performing just as well and right up to par with George Springer and better in some aspects. Better in WAR. The home runs, well, Brandon Nimmo's never was a power hitter, but he's starting to become one now. Not, and I don't even want to call him power hitter, but someone who can hit the ball out of the ballpark. Is George Springer the power hitter? No. If you take the life of the contract, right, for these guys, let me see. Let's see if we could do this quickly. I should have done this before. Let's see if we could do it real quick. I had done this before, but I took it away, and let's see if we could do it quickly. If you take Brandon Nimmo from 21 to 25, and you take George Springer from 21 to 25, Brandon Nimmo has a 17.6 WAR. George Springer 14.4. Brandon Nimmo 701 games played. George Springer 650 games played. Right? OPS plus. Brandon Nimmo 121. George Springer 123. 263 average for both of them. 353 on base for Nimmo. 343 for Springer. 434 slugging for Nimmo, 461 for Springer. 787 OPS for Nimmo, 804 for Springer. Ladies and gentlemen, there is not much difference. There is not much difference there. And again, George Springer just had probably his best year as a Toronto Blue Jay in his age 35 season. So I'm not here to tell you, listen, who's better, who's not better, whether the Mets need to keep or not keep Brandon Nimmo. Another thing that we saw come out in the last few days, as I'm going to end this video because his phone is driving me crazy, was a story in The Athletic. And now I've read two stories. One was by Mitch Bannon talking about the Blue Jays hitting coach and where he came from, the Dodgers, David Popkins, and the work that he's done and the preparation and the adjustments. We're Met fans. We heard a lot about adjustments this year as far as hitting and the New York Mets and the lack of adjustments. Well, they talked about the adjustments that they made, the adjustments in game, the adjustments even in series with the Mariners, and the way the Mariners were approaching them, who were considered a contact team, and the Mariners were challenging them and said, okay, they're going to challenge us, so now we're going to slug. You see that? We're going to put the ball in play. We're going to do things that people don't say that you can do in baseball anymore to win. But when we need to get out of that and maybe slug because they're attacking us and they're challenging us, then we're going to do some of that too. But that's putting in work. That's dedication. That's process. That's adjustments. And we hear that a lot with the Mets. Oh, we're putting in the work. We're working hard. The process. And I always say, it doesn't matter how hard you work. What the process is if it's not proper, if it's not the right way. And it's easy to say that these guys did the right thing because they got the results. But I say that also to say we just had a change in hitting coaches, bench coach, and so on and so forth. I'm going to need to start muting my damn phones when I do these videos. We'll see what Jeff Albert brings to the Mets. We'll see if he brings better adjustments, better processes to the New York Mets. But a lot of people say coaching doesn't matter. I also read another story just this morning, also in The Athletic, by Ken Rosenthal, who talked about how this offseason, George Springer worked with Michael Brantley. Michael Brantley called George Springer and said, yo, come, I got something for you. And they worked out and they made an adjustment that the hitting coaches saw because they send the stuff to the hitting coaches. Right? They send the stuff to David Popkins. And he was like, ooh, okay. And then they got into spring training and he struggled. And Springer said, it's okay. You're supposed to struggle in spring training. We're working on things. But the coach was like, yeah, but maybe we need to make an adjustment here. They did what they did. Springer kept working. He had some success, some struggle, and then more success and never struggled again and had the year that he had. So coaching does matter. And yes, these guys have instruction from all over the place and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the games, when it comes to the team, it's more about the adjustments in game, the adjustment throughout the year, how the team is going to approach a certain pitcher, how the team is going to approach the offensive philosophy overall. We talked about this on and on and on during the season, ladies and gentlemen. You have a philosophy of how you're going to do things. We kept hearing about the Mets' controlled aggression, which obviously wasn't working. And sometimes it did, but there were times that they needed to adjust, whether it be in-game or in the series, and they never did. They had trouble doing that. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this goes on. But I say all that to say, and I don't even know if we can follow along here because I've been all over the place, distracted by these phones, and just a little frustrated with that. But my thing is, I'm okay with a Brandon Nimmo and the fact that we ended up with him and not a George Springer. Would I have wanted a George Springer on here? Hell yeah. I wanted him at the time. Would George Springer had bounced back to have the year that he had right now in 2025 if he was a New York Met? Who knows? Who knows? Would we have given him the environment to be able to do that? Or would we have made it so uncomfortable that we practically would have ran the guy out of town already? Who knows? Who knows? But Brandon Nimmo was 32 years old. George Springer just did that at 35. And that even applies to those that are afraid of a Pete Alonso. That is proof that if you put in the right work, the right processes, and make the right adjustments, it can be done. And Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso strike me as guys that will put in the work, that would have the dedication that it would take. It's a matter of having the right guidance. We'll see what happens, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see what happens in this offseason that hasn't even yet gotten started yet. Hasn't even yet gotten started. But it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be an interesting one. A lot of things need to be done. Pitching, starting pitching, bullpen, run prevention. And yes, offense. Can this be improved by some of the coaches coming in who have a good reputation? Like a Jeff Albert as far as hitting, a K. Correa as far as defense? Is that the path that this team would take? While still believing in their guys? Even a guy like a Mark Vientos? It all remains to be seen. It all remains to be seen. You already know what it is, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed this late morning, really early afternoon morning blunt. But gotta do what you gotta do. All day, every day. Let's go Mets, baby. Peace.
Full of animals and we made ourselves with minimal. Fuck you, no subliminals. Putting in this work, nigga. That's why they feelings hurt, nigga. Swear we need a hearse cause we rep our shites to the dirt, nigga. If I'm in the club,